all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Too Obscure for TV podcast, where whenever we feel like it, we look for some really weird movies and watch them. And this week, David, what movie did I make you watch?
Made me watch is too strong. You give yourself some credit.
Mm-hmm.
You gave me some choices here.
I did.
But I did feel held hostage when I finally got to sit down and watch THAC0.
THAC0, a 2008 D&D fan film?
Fan films, probably, exactly. If people remember on our last episode of this installment of the podcast, we had our friend Thomas on, and we talked about Freak Out, which was a fan film in a looser sense.
It was a love letter to, like, horror films, comedy films. It is a slapstick kind of slasher film.
Yeah, and it started from, in our conversation, it started from a place of fan film and morphed into this totally different thing with an interesting story behind it. But this one, Dean recommended to me, and fan film, again, is a much more accurate label, and it was shorter film.
Much shorter.
Freak Out was actually feature length.
Yeah, Freak Out, I think, clocked in at about 90 minutes, 100 minutes, something like that.
This is 50 minutes. Much more digestible. And honestly, I'll give this too, and we talked about this, obviously, while we were watching it, but once it was done, kind of well done for what it is.
Yeah, like, that is something, because I saw this film... I should start by saying this is a movie. It's about Dungeons and Dragons, but not like
Tell people.
The movie. It's about Dungeons and Dragons, but the people who play Dungeons and Dragons, the forever nerds, the guys who are like, wife, kids, or whatever, but we still get together in my basement. We play Dungeons and Dragons and we bullshit and all the fun, nerdy, weird stuff. It's that kind of fan film. It's a movie about the fans of this thing, and I'm a big D&D guy. I've played it for years with my buddies from high school. It's fun. And I found this movie on a whim. I was just looking for like D&D like stuff on YouTube, and it's free on YouTube, by the way. So if you wanted to, you can actually watch this right now. And honestly, I thought it was going to be kind of trash when I started it because it's a little low quality. But it's really, like, the acting in it is a lot better than I think most things of that quality should be.
Yeah, those are the two things that stuck out to me. Is when we started watching it, it's low quality, just like Freak Out was. Freak Out obviously being done, though, in, I think it was, you said 1999 or whatever it was? I couldn't remember. We recorded that episode a few weeks ago.
Yeah, so I think the movie came out in 2003, I think? Or maybe not even that. But yeah, like it started in 99 and then it ended its production in like 2003 because it took a couple years for them to make it.
And then the timestamp on this one is 2008, if I'm correct?
Yes.
Which it definitely was made within that time because we were talking about this. It's probably made within the span of like a week.
Yeah. If we're thinking they really jammed this out, probably in the span of a week they made the movie. Maybe a month. If we're being charitable.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of time to take away from the D&D table, but but yeah, it's like what stands out certainly is that it's done on a digital VHS camcorder. It's There's one light if a scene is lit. And I will say every scene is lit, every scene is composed, every scene is rehearsed.
Yeah, there's no flubs.
Yeah,
in this movie.
Everything it has the basic qualities of film production and technique in it, which is fascinating because other than that, it's like these people really do look like just a group of nerds hanging out in like, I don't know, some small town in Montana or Minnesota or something.
Yeah, because I don't know where this was filmed. Like, that's kind of like the weird thing about these movies.
Midwestern.
Yeah, it looks like the Midwest. It looks like, maybe small town Wisconsin, Minnesota, so on and so forth. It looks like a small town. And it's you're right. Everybody in here looks real. You know, they all look like authentic D&D nerds, like, you know, mid-30s D&D people. Then all of a sudden we have like cameos by real famous people.
No shit. I'm hit with in not even the middle. It was like within the first 10 minutes of, and again that's saying a lot considering the film's only 50. But
yeah,
just out of nowhere, Neil Gaiman shows up.
Yeah, Neil Gaiman is a character in this movie. I mean, he has.
Like, he's the most famous writer in the world. I mean, it's.
Yeah, he has. Granted, super famous writer is 2008. He is actually famous 2008. All right, he already wrote Coraline. He already did Sandman. He did.
I believe that was like just a year or two after Coraline came out, wasn't it?
As a film, probably
something like that, or around that time.
He's thoroughly in the thick of his fame.
Thoroughly famous, and he's in this scene. They're at like a game store or comic book shop, and they're like talking, and then as they're leaving, like, oh my god, it's Neil Gaiman. And at first you think, okay, this is just some joke, and then it cuts and it's actually just Neil Gaiman just like reading a comic book, and he has like a line of dialogue. He like talks, he like says something to them, and then it's just like, that's it. And it's like, was he just in town?
Well, so this is what I want to ask, because like, you came to the table with this movie. Did you do any research on this?
I did do a bit of research on it. The thing is this is one of those movies that's in a very particular niche of film where there's not a whole lot on it. That's kind of the point of this kind of podcast, where they're a little too obscure for TV. These aren't the kind of movies you're going to catch even on late night cable. You're going to catch these kind of out there, right? Kind of bringing back the whole thing where, you know, you go to your local video store and they give you the blank VHS of that somebody's been trading around. It's a Star Wars special. That's kind of the nature of this. But I did do a little bit of research. Fun fact, THAC0 is Neil Gaiman's on-screen film debut, to my knowledge. So
you did say that in the middle of his cameo, and I was like, I'd like to fact check. I'd really like to fact check that, but
I'll give you the fact check. But like, I kind of want you to ask, like, what was the big things that kind of got you about this movie as we're watching it?
Okay, so the Neil Gaiman thing is obviously a huge bombshell.
Yes.
Like I was kind of saying before, this movie has technique in it. It's like if, like I told Dean, it's like if a group of students for the era got together to make it a movie and had all the school's equipment available to them, but it was a lot of dialogue in the end.
Yeah.
Because like, the film is practically all dialogue, and by the way, very well performed dialogue, albeit it's all nerd, jargon and conversations that are very quick and like witty that really give Aaron Sorkin a run for his money. And none of it adds up into anything. That's for sure. Like, the whole thing is like these Clerks style sections, because they even have like the cryptic titling over black screen in the middle of everything. Mm-hmm. But none of it really adds up to a whole lot, other than it's supposed to be reviewing this world of these nerds and kind of coming from this interesting little intro, which has little to do with anything that goes on the actual movie.
Yeah.
To this like oddly thematic and poignant ending about this world they live in.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing you bring up about like the beginning of the movie, where, I mean, the only point of the beginning of the movie is to explain what the hell role-playing games are, but the ending is actually kind of thoughtful, and it's nice. Also, to answer your question about Neil Gaiman, because I did look it up right now, technically, this is his first film debut, because he was an extra in Nightbreed, but he didn't have any lines, and then he was a narrator for like a TV movie, but he didn't physically appear. This is the first time he was in a narrative film where he was on screen and had lines. But I mean, it still counts. Whatever.
I'll give you that if it's his on-screen film debut, we can classify it that way.
I mean, I just kind of want to classify it like that because, bro, Neil Gaiman shows up in a fucking free YouTube movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising. I mean, we had a literal similar happening in Freak Out. With that band Less Than Jake.
Yes.
And theirs is much more out of nowhere. Like, Neil Gaiman at least is somewhat adjacent to this
world.
Yeah, whereas he's the writer and creator of one of the most famous comic book series of all time.
Sandman's really good.
Yeah, it's probably one of, if you really want to go there, probably one of the better pieces of literature that will have been created in the past 100 years. So, go figure.
It's really good.
But on top of all that, it's like, I mean, is he... I want to know the story of how he ends up in the movie, you know?
Well, so I'll give you a little info on that, because I mean, I don't know the very specifics about this film, but I do know a little bit about Neil Gaiman. Okay. Because, fun fact, so I used to work in a comic book store years ago, and the owner mentioned that she knew who Neil Gaiman was. And I was like, oh, that's cool, you know, did you meet him at a convention? And she was like, no, he's just like, he goes into like towns or whatever and just visits local comic book stores, being like, hey, you know, what books are you carrying? Because he loves comic books. He reads, you know, a man who writes comic books reads comic books, and he's that kind of guy. Yeah. But he does, and he'll do like signings and stuff, you know, at places, but he'll also just randomly just like walk into places and be like, hey, you know, what books do you have? You know, can I browse around your, you know, back issues? Yeah. So whenever he was in town, the owner of the comic book store I worked at, sometimes they would go out and like have dinner and say hi, you know, they were like friendly. So I can imagine that might have just been the thing here. Like, he might have just been doing a comic book signing maybe in that town, or he was just, you know, passing through on like a book tour and just, you know, walked in, and they might have just been lucky and been like, hey, Neil Gaiman, do you want to be in our movie for like a scene? It's one shot. He might have just said yes, because he is also that kind of guy who'd have just said yes to that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it'd be a hell of a coincidence.
It would be a hell of a coincidence. They show up to film their one thing in that comic book game store.
So, well, that's interesting. That actually puts it a little bit more into context. Because even then, they could have contacted him too, and
they could have called him and been like, "Hey,
you're around, and we know you do this, so it'd be really cool if you could do this for us as a part of the community." I mean, who knows? Who knows how it happened if there's no paper trail on this thing?
There's a little bit. It's just really difficult because the filmmaker who made this, he still works. He actually, I believe he I'm gonna say actually like 15 times because, well, actually, I believe he has like a career after THAC0. He makes movies. It actually has.
Look that up. I'd be interested to know what he's done.
Well,
because I do believe too. I really do believe that this could be a. Whereas Freak Out, it ends up just being like this odd cult phenomena. Really, aside from like these guys getting together to do this over years. I mean, they made it over for like, what, 4 or 5 years, they said?
For Freak Out? Something like that, yeah.
So it's like, yeah, nobody's really going to look at you and be like, you took 4 years to make a feature film? I'm not really jazzed about that. But this, I'm like, you know, if you showed this to somebody in TV, I feel like they'd be like, oh, so you know.
Well,
like how to.
Here's a fun fact. This film actually was seen and reviewed by actual festivals.
Yeah, I mean, Freak Out had a few.
Yeah, it won festivals. This is interesting. So, I have some quotes from people who've seen the film, and I actually have something about its selections at festivals. Unbelievably funny. Quoted Will Wheaton. Will Wheaton saw this movie, thought it was funny. Smart and Funny, that's Bill Corbett from Mystery Science Theater. We have, it was an official selection at Origins Game Fair in 2009, and an official selection at PAX 2009, which are
gaming. Those are the perfect place to show.
Yeah, they're gaming conventions, and this seems like, also, I didn't realize gaming conventions had film stuff.
Well, you know, I mean, I feel like they show it, and they can make it, they can, you know, classify or whatever I'm trying to say. Single out one of the showrooms, or what do they call that? The
halls, the convention.
Yeah,
halls?
the convention halls. To be like, instead of a panel, let's show this fan film that they made. Because the other thing that is certainly apparent in some of those reviews is that the film is pretty funny. It is fairly smart at times, and I really do think that they nail not just making a movie about their lives, but the lives of everybody who plays these games.
Yeah,
these are they caricature themselves, and they certainly do make themselves stereotypes of who they know they are, and I think that works to their advantage in creating kind of a guide to this world, as the movie very obviously opens on.
It's one of those things where these guys aren't playing themselves, they're playing themselves turned up to 11.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And I play D&D, and no meme, I've had conversations from this movie in real life. Yeah. Like, it's really weird how... So if you've played games long enough, or you've been a nerd long enough, or you've been in that world long enough, you're going to recognize stuff in this movie. It's really cool. Yeah. Also, to answer the question about the director going on to do other things.
Oh, yes.
Unfortunately, it looks like the director, Bill, has not gone on to do too much else within the industry, as long as IMDb is concerned. He has done other, short films and things like that. His YouTube channel is still, I believe, still active. You can find THAC0 on there. But our favorite actor in the film, Duck.
Oh, yes.
He has actually gone on to work in more films. He was in Little Men. He was an actor in that. And he was he was Kevin in Demon Slayer, which came out a few years ago.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, apparently he's still acting. And why don't you tell people about your favorite actor, Duck?
Yeah, this guy, he's my favorite character in the movie. All the characters are likable. All of them add something relevant to the story. There's the Dungeon Master character.
Yeah, you have Aaron, who's this kind of not eccentric, but this very particular kind of like Dungeon Master. He's a little bit yeah, he's a little bit of a control freak. You have their other buddy. His name's. Oh, you have their other buddy John, who's
he's the
bigger
bear of the group.
Yeah, big guy, and he's funny, but his whole thing is in everything's kind of light around him. And then you have Duck, and he is just.
He's the comic relief.
He's just the unabashed weirdo of your group.
I wouldn't call him a weirdo. I think he has a lot of charisma to him. Because what I like him to is like a chubby, childish Gambino, like a Danny Glover type.
Honestly, I could see him playing Troy in like a Community. Like he seems to have. That's actually a good way to describe him. He kind of feels like childish Gambino or Danny Glover in that respect.
So he has this really good charisma to him, and that was my favorite thing about it, because I thought they all do have these likable qualities about them, but I think he, above all, seems like the most normal of the group. I mean, that's also to say too, the bearish character,
John.
John, he was wearing this like collared shirt the whole time. He seemed kind of
like he showed up after he got off of work or something.
Yeah, like he gets off his data entry job and goes and plays D&D with his friends. Because that's the other thing that I was always kind of a little bit fascinated by, and maybe too, while watching it, these are the things that I would have liked to see them do. Is like, while I totally understand the film and that it's not about creating a story per se, it's just about showing these skits that all add up to like these things we love about what we do.
It's a movie not more about the story. It's a movie about the atmosphere,
right. And like from the get-go, there's a scene where one of the players is late by 2 hours, and everybody has that in their D&D group.
Every single person.
I dabbled, and I even had somebody like that in my group.
You played for like 6 months, and you were just like, that motherfucker was late every day.
Yeah, and it's like, whether it's that, or specifically too, if everybody shows up on time, you never get started on time, and it takes an hour and a half to get going.
Never. I've played for 8 years, and my buddy still shows up an hour late. You can time it to the watch, dude. I swear.
Yeah, and so it's like, there's that scene, and the friend isn't showing up on time, and there's this girlfriend situation that's ruining the dynamic of the group.
Yeah.
And the way it's structured in the movie, I'm sitting there going like, this is what the story's going to be about. It's that this is getting in the way of the thing they love, and then all these things will be in there as like a love letter, but this will be the central story.
Yeah.
No. It's actually not even referenced again until the end of the movie.
It's kind of interesting because you're a screenwriting guy. You're your bread and butter is plot, story structure, character development. That's your bread and butter. And we had a very in-depth conversation while we were going to go get food about, isn't it necessary for a film to have a plot? And you were like, well, a film has a plot regardless. Does this film have a plot?
Yeah, and there is one. It's just that it's like the plot's the foundation of everything. You know, the way I explained it to Dean, you're going to have a plot whether or not you like it, because it's literally just the summation of what that happens in your movie. The actions, or in this case, more really dialogue.
Dialogue, setting, stuff like that.
This is what I would call a paper-thin plot, where it's like there's about 5 things that actually happen in the movie. It's just then it's all supplemented by like pages and pages of dialogue that these guys came up with, which is a separate thing I want to talk about in a moment. But yeah, it all adds up to basically be a plot without like any sort of story. There's micro stories within each scene, and that's kind of how they structure it. Is that it's, you would call this episodic, but even then, it's like they're more sketches that have been edited together, which is also fine. You know, it's fine.
It's kind of, it's not really an anthology series, but it feels like these guys made 5 D&D related like short skits, and then we're like, okay, this is our movie. Pretty much.
And you know, aside from the fact that it's like they could have used a copy of Save the Cat in order to get through this, because then too, I think it really would have raised it to a whole nother level to where I'm like, this belongs in some conversations about, you know, indie films that are, you know, cult classics.
Yeah.
Maybe even a little bit too why Freak Out is a little bit more. I don't know if this Freak Out's more well known than THAC0, because I'm sure neither of them has particular.
This is too obscure for TV. The baseline premise of this show is films that are really, really hard to find.
And it's also a stretch for me to even assume that Freak Out had a story.
Yeah, well, Freak Out had a story. It had a plot. It's one of those things where, so Freak Out was a hard, like, screwball, weird comedy, right?
Yeah.
And the plot in that movie was more, we have this concept, now we're just going to kind of have jokes every 10 pages, have a gag every 5, and then we'll hit 90 minutes eventually. And we'll throw it in this really, really basic 3-act structure and just see how it plays out. Whereas THAC0, it's like they don't even bother with that. It's like we know exactly what we are. We're basically going to make a riff track for 50 minutes about Dungeons & Dragons, our playgroup, you know, the playgroup of every D&D group in general, and kind of represent that culture in a way that's coming from a place of love rather than disdain.
Yeah, and you know, it's like I said, and this is the point I've been trying to get back to, is like the whole dialogue thing. The pages and pages of dialogue that actually fill up this movie are so surprisingly well. It's clever, well rehearsed, fast paced, and full of a lot of like very specific things.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if you don't play D&D, you're not really gonna get it. But even still, they find a way to make it like noticeable and like understandable, kind of what's going on. Because, you know, like I said, I play D&D a little bit, is how I would classify it, whereas Dean is a bona fide player.
I am the king of nerds. I play World of Warcraft, I read comic books, and I play D&D.
Yeah, and I have no idea what is it, GURPS or GURPS?
Oh, God, okay. So there's a running gag in this film about the role-playing system known as GURPS. GURPS stands for Generic Universal Role-Playing System. And the meme, if you want to the meme about GURPS is that it's, you know, kind of crap because it's generic, you know. It's something where it's like, oh, you fit it into anything, and it's like the meme in the community is that no one plays GURPS. The only reason you play GURPS is because you can't afford D&D books. Yeah. That's kind of the meme. And, you know, I've never played GURPS. I mean, you'll never get me to admit on recording if I've ever played GURPS or not. That don't happen. But yeah, that's the running gag in the movie, that no one plays GURPS.
The nail on the head is that you can recognize it's a running gag, so you can recognize the shame admitted along with playing GURPS, on top of the fact that it's exaggerated.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, you know what this actually reminds me a lot of is there's this particular style of comedy related to the creator of such Nickelodeon cartoons as Fairly Odd Parents and
Bill Hartman, I think is his name.
I think so. Let me
double check. No worries. I mean, I can gush about this for a little bit longer before we get into the nitty gritty about it. So
Butch Hartman.
Butch Hartman, yeah.
It reminded me a lot of that, like, or at least that era of like comedy, where the technique and the method of it is taken seriously. It's a little wacky. It's a little bit like kind of classical in certain ways, where it's not supposed to be like deconstructing or like just, it's not Rick and Morty humor, you know?
Yeah.
It's like everything is fucking breaking the fourth wall.
Don't get me wrong, I like Rick and Morty. I hate Rick and Morty fans, because it's like when people are like, yeah, you know, in Rick and Morty fandom, it's like, look, you're not gonna understand the jokes unless you're just like super smart, man. I'm like, bruh, I don't need to be that smart to understand the poo poo joke.
And yeah, and you know what? That's actually not a bad parallel either, because like these people want normal people to recognize the jokes. They want people to understand Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, that's probably why they made this, on top of making it for the actual fans of the game.
Yeah.
That's why they make it so like they try to make it anyway so easy to understand, is that they want you to get into it.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole point of being a fan of this game, is that it's all about comfort and camaraderie.
It's all about like the game isn't about the game, it's about the friends you have that you play the game with.
Yeah.
It's a good parallel to be like, well, why did your granddad and all of his drinking buddies show up and play cards in the garage every Friday night? It's basically the same parallel. It's because, well, they're all friends and they just needed something to do together. Yeah.
Which is interesting, because like the one thing I'm fascinated by endlessly is like kind of like the Americana history of early Dungeons and Dragons and Magic.
Oh, buddy.
And like the satanic undertones that people thought it had, you know? When all it was just like nerds in the basement. Literally what the movie is, actually.
So I got a story for you.
Yeah.
So funny how you say, Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, those were the things in the late 80s, early 80s, where, worshiping this is going to, make you into a devil worshiper. Yeah. So I play Magic the Gathering. I'm into D&D.
Yeah, just add layering more nerd on top of it.
More nerd, and back when anime, like manga, the old...
My sister was very much into it.
Yeah, well, I got into that basically when that stuff started to become a thing in North America in like the early 2000s. I mean, obviously it was there beforehand, but like I was like, oh man, like Detective Conan, Case Closed, came to America. I love that show on Adult Swim, so I read it. And again, I'm going to keep exposing the amount of super nerd I am. Yeah. And my teacher took my book away and was like, yo, is this one of those devil books? And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, all right, if there's tits or if there's like any pentagrams in here, I'm sending you to the office. And I was like, bro, it's just about some like, and I had to think about it. I was like, oh, wait a minute, there might be fucking tits and some evil sorcery in that anime.
Because like Japanese manga was particularly above PG-13 most of the time.
Yeah, it was really weird. But
especially when they were created by like, guys who were above the age of 26 writing about high school.
Yeah, look, I didn't read no fucking porno manga, all right? I read Case Closed was basically like Sherlock Holmes, all right? That's what it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I can, even that stuff where it's like, the satanic panic stuff, I may not be able to relate directly to that satanic panic, but I can relate to the whole adults not understanding the shit you're into and thinking it's bad.
And that exists in like all subcultures too, because just as like you've been into all the nerd things for a while, Like for me, that existed a lot in like the music stuff I would do when I was in high school, and then like being surrounded by like the punk and metal music. It's like, that was always seen as like are you depressed, are you violent or something kind of thing, and it was like, no, really what it is it sounds good to me when I'm 14. It's like,
To juxtapose the massive nerd that is Dean is the like tattooed up metalhead that is David over here. No. You're not the cool
glasses. It's not rocket science. It's it's like, but yeah, it is kind of interesting to see like the preconceived notions people have about these like weird subcultures, and D&D is, I think, especially interesting to me because it's such a weird disconnect between what suburban moms thought Dungeons and Dragons was, it being that whole satanic panic thing, and then what it actually was just a bunch of people interested in like Middle English, Wiccan and pagan things.
It wasn't even that far, dude. You know what people got into? You know why people got into D&D? Because they were massive nerds and they wanted to play Aragorn, son of Arathorn, ruler of Rohan from Lord of the Rings. And also, I have to say the whole thing because I'm a massive nerd who loves J.R.R. Tolkien. But that's besides the point.
Yeah, and that's true. It's like at the end of the day, what it is, as well as being recreation and a way to connect with people in a community, is it's an escape.
Yeah.
From real life, which is terrifying and depressing and.
Welcome to 2020.
Yeah, we probably need Dungeons and Dragons now more than ever, which is odd to admit, but yeah, I mean, now more than ever, people need to escape their lives in a lot of different ways, and
there's a whole lot of worse ways to do it than Dungeons and Dragons. I can tell you that much. Yeah. Also, this movie also has kind of a heartwarming wrap up at the end, because the whole thesis and I guess the end of the film, which really wraps up what's going on, is the late player shows up and he kind of talks to him. He's like, yeah, I was thinking about, playing, why do I play all these RPGs? And it was because of all you guys are my best friends. And, they all laugh. And, there's one final bit at the end. They all laugh. It's over. And then we have on text on black screen, or white text on a black screen, that the film is dedicated to Gary Gygax and who is the creator of Dungeons and Dragons, and David Arneson, who was the co-creator of Dungeons and Dragons, because by the time the movie came out, they had both passed away within like a year of each other, or within a few years of each other. So this is kind of a thing where it's like, hey, Dave,
thank you,
Dave, Gary, thanks for letting all us weird nerds have friends.
Yeah.
Even in this very weird game, thank you.
Yeah, and and that scene, as well as another scene that really got me in the middle of it, was the scene about John getting rid of all of his memorabilia.
Yeah.
Because he woke up one night after a nightmare, which turned out apparently just to be a scene from Labyrinth.
You never seen Labyrinth, man? Come on.
No, I've seen Labyrinth, and it's just like, it's like there was kind of an interesting thing there, like. It was one of the scenes that if there was that story from the beginning, could have been connected to that, and then like, damn, it's had so much more potential than it needed to have. But
that, and the actor who plays John really tries to sell it. Like
all of them do.
Yeah,
but yeah, he definitely does, and it's like, it really kind of dug into this, like, all stories kind of have their like thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Aristotle's Poetics, all that kind of crap.
Yeah, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, and that was, I feel like, the ugly bit of it, where it's like, this is the antithesis of what being a nerd is that eventually you have to come to terms with the fact that this is all meaningless.
There's a point where you kind of realize that all the cool stuff you got in your 20s, in your 30s, it just turns into junk that's collecting dust.
Yeah, and that, you spent, like they said, hundreds of dollars on, only to find out that it's like, you don't use it, so why not just sell it again and get it out of your life? And that's, I think, actually, even still why I like that scene, is because it doesn't end with like some like really sad thing that doesn't get resolved at the end. almost immediately the character realizes, like, I'm glad to have that crap out of my life, because then it gets, it pushes everything out of the way and gets to the real important thing, which is this.
It is funny because he makes a point to say that, yeah, I got rid of all the stuff I didn't use, but I kept all the stuff we use. All the games that I play with you guys, I kept. Yeah. And it's really interesting. This movie, the whole, I guess, crux of the film is, friendship, I guess, camaraderie, I guess, same stuff we said at the beginning. But yeah, this movie, for 50 minutes, I say I definitely enjoyed the watch.
It kept my attention. It was enjoyable. There were some good scenes. The cell phone scene is great.
The cell phone scene was the one that got the good laugh.
And also, I mean, if you think about it, is kind of evergreen in the fact that still definitely exists in many forms.
Oh yeah.
If anything, it only got more true. And yeah, I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed this one.
All right. Well, David, I think we're kind of getting to the end of this one. Not super long, but the movie wasn't super long either.
Yeah, it's like proportionally, this is a pretty full conversation for what this is.
Yeah. So I kind of want to ask you a question before we go in. We've watched 3 films so far. We've watched A Necessary Death. We watched Freak Out, and we've watched THAC0 so far. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get a couple more of these 2 obscures in. This is generally an infrequent kind of podcast, but I try and make this...
Yeah, this is more like the hobby, like we figured out something to do for an episode, so we're going to do it.
Yeah, I'm going to try and push for more episodes to come out later, but I want to ask you this. So we've seen 3 movies so far. Which one of these do you think you enjoyed the most, and which one do you think was actually the best movie so far?
Right, so my enjoyment level... honestly, had to have come out of Freak Out, because that one, you and me and Thomas watched that one, and it genuinely, like, catches you off guard with how funny it can be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed that one probably the most, but I still have to stand by my pick that started the show, A Necessary Death, as being the one I think is still the best one, because that story, to me, to this day, is just, it blows me out of the water.
Honestly, it's good to know. I'm going to try and break that top spot with our next couple of episodes, but that's going to have to wait for next time. But for everybody out there, unlike Freak Out and Unnecessary Death, you can actually go and watch THAC0 for yourself and get a good view of it. Give the YouTube channel, I think it's the director's name, which is Bill Stittler. Stittler?
How would you spell that one?
Yeah, Bill, spelled Bill, if you can't spell Bill, and it's Stittler, Stitteler. That's on YouTube. You can also just search the movie. It's called THAC0. It's spelled THACO. And you can find that YouTube. It's the first one that comes up. You can't miss it. It's 50 minutes long. Yeah. Give it a watch if you like D&D, if you like your friends, if you like bullshitting for 50 minutes and watching other people bullshit for 50 minutes. You'll like
cool 50 minutes, I'm at it. It goes by pretty quick.
Yeah, it's actually really, really well edited. There's some long dialogue bits, but if you're in the know, you're gonna get it. But yeah, so I guess that's it. David, you want to plug anything before we wrap up this one?
No, I mean, end of the year, we've if not by now, by the time you're hearing this, we'll probably have released our end of the year episode and the rest of the episodes at the end of the year, and depending on the release date of this, maybe we're even in the new year, experiencing new things, exciting things on the docket for the double feature, and a lot of other things that will be coming out on the channel. So just keep an eye out for that. And Dean, where can they keep an eye out for all that?
They can keep an eye out for that on our YouTube channel, In the Frame. That's where you can find the Double Feature podcast. You can find this podcast, Too Obscure for TV. And you can also follow us on our Instagram, doublefeature_podcast at Instagram. And beyond that, you can also follow me at the Film Club podcast I do with my girlfriend, who is actually going to be joining us for our holiday extravaganza, or has already joined us for our holiday extravaganza. Look out for that episode. That one is also at the Film Club podcast on Instagram.
Exactly.
Yep.
Well, until next time, Dean, you will have to roll for...
You can do this, man.
Yeah, it's been a while since I played. roll for confidence that this file will not corrupt.
Oh, I can already tell you that's a nat 1, homie.
Yeah.
All right. Later on, everybody. See you soon.
See you next time.
Peace.
So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.